Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. My name is LaMonica Jones. I am the Director of DC Hunger Solutions, and I have with me as my co-presenter today, I'll allow her to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Rihanna Kim, Policy Director at DC Greens. Do you want to do our intros after you do the session intro, LaMonica?
Yes, we can do that. I just want to welcome you all this afternoon. The title of our session today is A Case for Giving SNAP a Raise, Leveraging Legislation to Support Local Level Change. So to go ahead and get us started, for those of you all who are joining us this afternoon, we like to know where everyone is from, and also whether or not you all are working on any local level legislation to give your own states, support your own local level supplement. So if you can let us know who you are, where you're from, and then a yes or a no, whether or not you're working on any legislation at the local level to support your SNAP participants.
Hi, LaMonica. It sounds like we can't hear you. I want to double check that you're connected to your headphones.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yes. Sounds
Okay,
great.
perfect, awesome. So let me dial it back a little bit. So again, my name is LaMonica Jones, and I'm the Director of DC Hunger Solutions. Our work here in the district involves ending hunger in the nation's capital. And so a lot of our work, we work with our district residents on increasing participation in our federal nutrition programs, inclusive of SNAP. We also do a lot of policy level legislation, which we will get into today, which centers on our SNAP, our school meals, and several other pieces of information. We also work on educating our district residents as well as our community partners on what the state of hunger is across the district. Rihanna?
Thanks, LaMonica, and good afternoon, everyone. Like I said, I'm Rihanna Kim. I use she, her, and they, theirs pronouns, Policy Director at DC Greens. And DC Greens is a Black-led multicultural organization that's dedicated to expanding food access and health equity in the district. We do that in a few ways. One is through policy advocacy, so that's my main gig. Another is through our 1 acre urban farm in DC's Ward 8, and then also through some direct programming. So we run a produce prescription program, which helps folks access fruits and vegetables through Medicaid. And I'll be speaking second today after LaMonica talks about the nuts and bolts of this campaign and this work. And I'll be focusing on advocacy strategies that we employ, but also that can be generally applicable to any work you're doing in the policy arena.
Great. Thank you so much, Rihanna. So as we get started today, and as Rihanna shared, what we're going to focus on today are discussion topics. We're going to have a discussion on policy, so some of the policy initiatives that we've worked on so far in the district, as well as how to advocate. So kind of sort of an advocacy one-on-one training for those that are interested or are new to advocacy, policy and advocacy work, as well as steps to take in order to introduce local level supplement in your respective states. So I'll start off with just some foundational background on hunger in DC, the background on SNAP in the district, as well as the SNAP emergency allotments, what I know that we are all familiar with, as well as give SNAP a raise. And then I will hand it over to Rihanna to go into our advocacy 101 session. So what does hunger across the nation as well as in DC look like? So in 2022, and I guess I should backtrack by saying DC Hunger Solutions, we are one of the statewide initiatives of the Food Research and Action Center, or FRAC, as most are familiar with. And so in 2022, FRAC conducted a study, and it continued to share the information that DC remains in one of the top 3 states when it comes to older adult hunger, right at 13%. And so in addition to that, we know that 13.5 of the individuals are experiencing food insecurity, as well as due to a most recent DC food assessment survey, food insufficiency survey that was released just a couple weeks ago here in DC, that 15.9% of our households are experiencing food insufficiency. And so when we talk about food insecurity versus food insufficiency, what we're talking about is the access of not having any food versus not having enough food. And so our DC Food Policy Council most recently released their food assessment where they assessed food insufficiency. And so they were able to determine that almost 16% of households in DC did not have enough to eat. And of that 15.9%, 32% of Black households, 17% of households with older adults, that's age 65 and older, as well as almost 19% of our district households with children did not have enough to eat. So looking at it more from a national perspective on what does hunger look like, bringing it all the way down to what we're experiencing here at the local level. So how did we get here to where we are today? How did we get to the point where we needed to focus on some local level legislation, and taking a deep dive into assessing the lack of access when it comes to food in the district, particularly among our targeted communities, those being our older adults. As I just said, DC is the third highest in the nation for older adult hunger, as well as focusing on our immigrant families, our veterans, our returning citizens, as I like to call them, our littlest eaters. How did we get to this point where we needed to take some initiative and to take some steps to do something at the local level to support our federal SNAP benefits? And so the first iteration of Give SNAP a Raise, before it was officially called Give SNAP a Raise, was the Food Stamp Expansion Act. And this was prior to it being called STAP. And the first step of this was categorical eligibility granted to SNAP participants that are at or below the 200% of the federal poverty limit. And then there was an implementation through our Department of Energy for LIHEAP, so the Heat and Eat initiative. And so through the Department of Energy, eligible households would receive some energy assistance between $215 and $1,800 as a one-time assistance benefit based off of household size, income, heating sources, and then the type of dwelling that they reside in. And so that was our first iteration of how is it that we can offer some support for our SNAP participants here in the district. But in 2015, we realized that we needed to do more. There was more work that could be done. We were hearing from a lot of our older adults that were continuing to experience hunger. Many of them were on a fixed income. They were receiving Social Security benefits, and we know that Social Security is counted as earned income for SNAP eligibility. And so in conversations with a lot of our older adults, it centered on what is it that we can do? How is it that we can support you with a permanent solution on making sure that you can afford one of your basic human needs, which is food. I always say food, safety, and shelter. But what are some of the things that we can do here at the local level to ensure that we can supplement what you're receiving at the federal level through SNAP? And so the SNAP Expansion Act became effective on January 1st, 2015. And at the time, what this did was that it offered a locally funded supplement, raising the local level benefits to $30. And so DC was one of the pioneers across the country that was focusing on this. We had some other states that we modeled this after, but it was an attempt to make sure that we are offering additional benefits to our most vulnerable households, our older adults, those that were in households that we knew that it needed that would benefit from the additional supplement. And so fast forward to pre-pandemic, 2021, we realized that we were facing, our COVID, we were facing, looking at higher participation levels within SNAP. And so currently where we sit right now is where we have over 140,000 district residents that are currently receiving SNAP. The highest participation of those residents reside east of the Anacostia River. For those that are not familiar with DC, I don't have my helpful DC map up, but Ward 7 and 8 in the district is an area that experiences continued disinvestment. It is an area across the district that has a very high percentage of food insecurity, as well as households experiencing low income. So when we compare Ward 7 and 8 east of the Anacostia River to other areas in the district, some of our higher income earning wards, they are earning upwards of $120,000 as their median income levels whereas in Ward 7 and 8, east of the river, their median income is around $47,000, $48,000. And so east of the river is also where our highest percentage of SNAP participants reside. And so for the sake of picture sake, just wanted to paint that as helpful. And then also DC has about 670,000 residents, close to 700,000, but not quite 700,000. And so the bulk of those SNAP participants, again, reside east of the Anacostia River. So pre-pandemic, our district numbers, we had about 94,000 participants within SNAP. And so they were receiving about $149 per person per month, which is roughly about $4.80. And I'll get into some later information about how that has changed since the pandemic and what that kind of looks like now with the emergency allotments ending and what we were able to see with the boosting of the emergency allotments. So in August 2021, at the time, USDA announced that it was increasing the thrifty food plan levels by 21%. And so we thought it was going to be an increase of 36. It was about an increase of $36 per person. But the SNAP benefits were inadequate for a majority of our participants. And so it still wasn't enough in order to provide enough funding for our older adults, for example. And I continue to mention our older adults because, they are one of our most vulnerable populations here in the district, but it still wasn't enough. Individuals our residents were just desiring to purchase some of, their basic necessities, produce. And so we wanted to make sure, what is it that we can do at the local level? And so moving forward a little bit, this is just a snapshot of what the emergency allotments that were implemented and what we were looking at. And so those emergency allotments, once they were implemented, we were able to see that they benefited over 84,000 of our residents here in the district. And so once those emergency allotments ended, we were looking at a loss of between $13 and $14 million. It was pretty close to 14 million, but it was a little bit over $13 million. So for a lot of our residents, particularly our older adults, those benefits dropped from $281 all the way down to that local benefit that had been implemented at $30. And so what this looked like, if you remember just from a few slides ago, pre-pandemic, our benefits were about $4.80 a day for our SNAP participants. And what the emergency allotments did is that they allowed individuals to, it was about $6 per day is what they were averaging. And so this is the emergency allotments were able to boost what the individuals, our SNAP participants, were receiving, but this still wasn't enough. We knew at the district level that we needed to do more, that we needed to take action, that there was additional funding that we needed to allocate in order to support our SNAP residents across the district. And so in December of 2021, our Councilmember Christina Henderson introduced the first iteration of Give SNAP a Raise Amendment Act. And so at the time, the act would raise all of our local SNAP benefit levels at about 10% after the USDA's 2021 revision of the Thrifty Food Plan. The act would also change the minimum benefit to 15% of the maximum SNAP benefit instead of the current flat rate of $30. So instead of just receiving the flat rate of $30, our SNAP participants would then receive 15% in addition to their maximum benefit amount. And so unfortunately, that act did not pass in 2021, but it was reintroduced January 3rd of 2022 with some additional amendments to that, some revised amendments to that. And so this new benefit would add an additional 10% on top of the federal government's maximum monthly allotment for a recipient's household. And so once we determined the number of SNAP participants that resided in the district at the time, we determined that it would be $51 million would be allocated over the course of a 3 fiscal year period. So fiscal year 23 through fiscal year 26. And it would be a total of $213 million that would be allocated over this time period, with a small dollar amount going to our state agency in order to improve their system so that they can allocate the benefits accordingly. And so when we did the math on this and we looked at the number of district residents that were expected to receive funding from Give SNAP a Raise at the time, it was a $47 increase on top of their benefits under Give SNAP a Raise. And so what I didn't include in here, which I did not include in here, is where we are now with Give SNAP arrays. And so it was passed in the end of January, in December of 2022. The legislation was passed, and here recently, just the end of the federal fiscal year, September 30th, Give SNAP arrays was funded. And so starting in January of 2024, our district residents will receive that additional $47 on top of their maximum benefit amount. And so that will go all the way through this upcoming fiscal year, September 30th, 2024. So we were able to successfully introduce legislation, pass legislation, and then pass funding in support of the legislation so that our district SNAP participants would receive those additional benefits. And so a huge part of what we were able to do is organizing and advocating on behalf of our SNAP recipients. And so I'm going to pass it over to Rihanna to give us a little organizing advocacy one-on-one on how we were able to successfully do that.
Thanks, Monica. All right. Hope everyone is still with us, still feeling good. There's a bunch of resources in the chat. So if you have not been looking over there, be sure to check those out. Let me just adjust my little screen here. Okay. So like Monica said, I'm going to take the basics of policy advocacy. These are things that we employed in our campaign that we still employ, but it's not specific to Give SNAP arrays. So we employ these methods on any of our policy advocacy pieces of work. This photo actually shows one of our recent trainings with community members on our jail food reform campaign. So most of the photos you'll see are from my own advocacy, personal, professional. So this is my partner, Winnie Houston, leading that testimony training that we did for the jail food reform. Today, I'm going to break things down into 3 buckets. I'll try to focus on the most critical elements, and there's a lot to go over. So if we hit time, I'm always happy to have additional conversations after this, or I'll try to wrap it up if we go long. I'm going to start with the policy version of what I call the 3 sisters, a term which some of you may recognize already. Then we're going to talk a little bit about relationship building and just general approach. And lastly, we'll hit some key campaign elements: strategy, organizing, and communication. Next slide, please. So the 3 sisters, this is an allegory that's found in many North American indigenous cultures, and it speaks to the importance of allyship, sustainability, and balance. It also happens to be about food, as you can maybe guess from the image. I may live in the city, but I am a farm girl at heart, so it always comes back to the plants for me. So the original 3 sisters of this story are corn, beans, and squash. Each of them provides critical nutrients for the body, but no one of them provides everything we need. Grown together, however, these plants take on superpowers. They form a nutrient-rich and balanced diet for a person, but they also support one another's growth in a symbiotic partnership. I won't get into the details of like how the squash shades the soil and all of that, but I'm tempted, but I won't do that today. I want instead to use this story to talk about the major actors in a policy campaign and why it's critical to consider them as part of an ecosystem together and not just singularly. I've zeroed in for simplicity's sake on policymakers, implementers, and community leaders, but you could easily substitute other categories or key players for your campaign. The important piece here is to understand that it's about considering all the elements in a campaign working together and thinking about how they can support and influence one another. Very much like real sisters, your advocacy works best if you consider the needs and the peculiarities of all of them and don't leave any one of them out. You can go to the next slide. So the 3 sisters are an important highlight for me because I've seen firsthand in my own advocacy how not correctly identifying the key players at the beginning or understanding their relationships can really delay or even derail a campaign. So a quick example, when I was in New York City, I had the privilege to be on the ground floor of the modern, healthier school food and local purchasing movements. And this is pre-Michelle Obama. So this is at the beginning of this wave. I was working for a New York City council member who was dedicated to the issue. So at this time, I was on the government side looking out, but I also had pre and post experience on the advocate side. And what I saw was a lot of advocates were spinning their wheels because of inaccurate targeting and a misunderstanding about how New York City's school food system which I admit is unnecessarily complicated, how it worked. So many of these folks were designing their campaigns to pressure the New York City Council. So they were coming at us, they were coming at the speaker to take action. The problem was that the New York City Council had very little control over school food procurement. The governance of this issue at the time was that this power was dispersed. The New York City Department of Education held a lot of autonomy, but the real lever for change here was the State Board of Education. So not only was the New York City Council the wrong target, but advocates were actually focused on the wrong level of government entirely. So I give this example as why it's important that we understand who the sisters in our garden are and how they work together relative to the campaign goal we want to achieve. So what I'm using under these categories as my sisters, under policymakers, I have the executive. So that's a president, a governor, a mayor, and the legislative. So it's kind of 2 for 1, Congress, state reps, local council members, that sort of thing. The implementers, that's our department or agency folks who actually translate the laws and have to make them happen. And then our community leaders, who folks like you and I in this virtual room right now. So the policymakers probably get the most attention of the 3, but they are neither where the story begins nor where it ends. In fact, the ideas for most policy come from community leaders. And without the support of community leaders, particularly impacted folks, it's unlikely a policy is going to go very far. The most left out sister, I think, are probably the implementers. They are folks like the USDA or the Department of Human Services locally. Their role may be less visible, but you better believe that any good policymaker, so that might mean the mayor or the council member, is going to take that agency's opinion and their budget requests into account when they consider policy action. So getting them on board with your policy, understanding their needs before you get too far into a campaign is really critical. So how do we really parse out who's important to our campaign? Maybe the judiciary is important, which I don't have here, for example. That's where one of my favorite tools comes into play, which is the power map. We can go to the next slide. These are 2 power map examples that I pulled from the internet. One is from Together Oklahoma, and the other is from a consultant's page. The power map on the left from Together Oklahoma is what we might call a web version. It maps out our garden, so to speak, and shows how the different stakeholders are connected. One thing that's not on this map that we could add to be more helpful would be arrows of influence. So not only showing just the connections that you see here, but maybe arrows that show what the power dynamic is between them. So for example, Senator Jones, they're kind of in the center there. We might have an arrow to show that Raymond Katz is an influencer for Senator Jones if we know that Raymond is a major donor or maybe an important advisor. The second model, the one on the right, and you can see that these are pretty simple, right? So this can be used, made in a lot of different applications or even drawn out if you need. The second model uses a line graph, and that's showing where stakeholders fall across a scale measuring support, with most supportive on the right and influence with most influential at the top. This type of mapping is really helpful because it helps us prioritize our engagement and use our resources wisely. So maybe someone is really, really engaged, but they don't have much influence in our campaign. And so we have to think about the right way to use that person if they're not likely to help us really advance the goal. So, and if the idea of making a power map or just the concept of power mapping is giving you a headache, don't stress out. This work is best done in community. And so that might mean a group of folks inside your organization, but even better, if you can, do it with a diverse group of folks that are part of your campaign that play different roles. Their perspectives will be really helpful. Some people are going to be obvious. Maybe the mayor is an obvious choice, but talking to other advocates, you will probably identify new key players and maybe even change your mind about how influential or how supportive someone really is. And power maps can be revised. You don't have to know everything the minute you sit down. And just because you don't know everything doesn't mean you shouldn't start doing the organizing or doing the power mapping. Things change. You can adjust your power map as you learn more and as you test out strategies and the campaign moves along. We'll go to the next slide. Relationship building. So relationships are everything in policy work. This is just a 1-slide section, but I wanted to give it a place of emphasis because it's so easy in this work, in policy work, and especially in the virtual world where we're not together physically right now, to remember that you're dealing with other humans. even in advocacy, yes, other human beings, like people that missed lunch, people that have to pick their kids up, people that, really are waiting for vacation time. So we have to keep that in mind and consider relationship building even when we're making an ask. We started getting at the importance of relationships with the three sisters example, which was showing us that building relationships across the issue area and looking at different stakeholders, different movers and shakers is really important. Now, while we're all watching Grumpy Cat move back and forth, I want to share a quick story about getting your cat fed. And I hope it's been really impactful to me after I heard it. And I hope that it helps you think about engagement, influence, and relationships in your campaign. So we'll do a little visualizing exercise. Let's say you live in an apartment or a house or wherever with your cat. Your apartment is a mess. And in that messy apartment, you have a cat. The cat is also a mess. They're dirty, they're mean, they bite, they scratch, they willfully ignore the litter box. Now, let's say you need to go away for a little bit. And even though your cat is troublesome, you still want them to be taken care of. So you bring this big favor to your neighbor and your pitch goes like this. I never thought you were a very good neighbor. I thought the neighbor before you was really much better, but I need you to do something for me. I want you to come over and feed my cat and take care of them. And if you don't help me this one time, I will be furious with you forever. Does that sound like a winning approach to getting your cat fed? I mean, not for me. It does sound a little familiar though, because in a simplified way, it's an approach I see a lot of advocates take when they want something. If you've never reached out to a policymaker or community leader or an agency, and the first conversation is like this, how far are you really going to get? And I'm not saying there's not time and a place for a hard sell or protesting or being, angry or forceful, but you need to start relationship building early and then keep nurturing that relationship and keep remembering the human element. If you just show up when you're upset and then disappear, your impact is going to be less. Also, don't lie about how bad your cat is. The person watching the cat, or in this case, the policymaker, is going to find out eventually. So trying to make something sound more politically feasible or hiding the fact that there might be challenges is going to backfire. Be clear and direct about the pitfalls, and if you can, come ready with solutions to them. I also want to encourage folks to really be ready to have a conversation, especially in this work. Sometimes we are just bombarding someone with talking points, or we're just rushing through our script. Leave room for them to ask questions of them, and really listen to the answer. Because even if they don't give you the answer that you want, they might be giving you valuable information about how you can continue this conversation. And that's really the key thing. Hitting all your talking points is not as much a priority as making a positive impression and the space for future conversations. Next slide, please. Okay, we're getting close on time, so I'll try to be quick. So our last section, we've identified the three sisters, got the lay of the land with power maps. We're keeping relationships in mind. So we're going to dig into some core elements of strategy, organizing, and communication. And this little photo is from DC Council when we got the council members to come out to Black Lives Matter protest a few years ago. That was a big internal advocacy win, so I included that photo here. We can go to the next slide. So starting off, defensive versus proactive campaigns. I just wanted to put this on here. Defensive is stopping something bad that's happening. The timeline's typically out of your control. The campaigns tend to look similar. It's really about slowing things down long enough to stop the bad thing from happening. Proactive campaigns, by contrast, are all really unique. They each face different political terrain, and your strategy needs to adapt to match that terrain. Figuring out which type of campaign you have is pretty simple, but hitting your other campaign checklist targets, which are on the right-hand side of the slide, might be more difficult. It's really, really going to be worth it to go through them, though. Next slide. So this grid shows a great mapping strategy to kind of really get yourself organized, starting with goals. Of course, a great place to start in any work. What are your short, medium, and long-term goals? What does victory look like? That's something I think a lot of folks neglect, and then they have trouble assessing their progress. If you're clear about what constitutes a win at the beginning, then you can have a clear assessment of how your campaign is doing as you progress. Organizational considerations. Do you have the resources, the people, the expertise, the funding to make this campaign happen or to participate? Don't say yes if you don't have a good grasp of what your personal or your organizational capacity is. A burnt out advocate is not really good for anyone, least of all your campaign goals. So there are many things you might want to support, but we need to match up campaigns against our capacity and against our mission. So that helps us prioritize as advocates and make sure we show up the best way possible. Constituents, allies, and opponents. There's some great questions here that can help you make your power map. Targets, similarly, these are your influencers, your lever pullers, and your final decision makers. So both of those middle two are parts of your power map. And then tactics. This is very important to me personally. Tactics and activities are your means to an end. They're not the goal in and of themselves. And it may sound like just semantics, but it's really important to be clear about what you're doing and why. So sometimes I see a goal in a policy campaign and it's like, have 3 meetings. Having a meeting is not a goal. Or if it's a goal, it's not a very good one. The meeting is just an activity, but it should be moving you toward something, toward achieving your goals. And when you're designing your tactics, there's some great things to remember on here. Make sure they're in context, be flexible, have some creativity, that they're directed at the right target, that they're agreed upon by your base, that your community is on board, and that they're backed up by some organizing power. We can go to the next slide. So organizing. I want to quote an article by Owen Bailey, the former executive director of the Environmental Defense Center. He said, all too often, while our work represents the values of the communities we represent and work within, we do not spend the time and effort to effectively communicate with and engage these communities to help. Being right is not enough. To win, we must organize. And really, I could just leave it there. I think Owen says it really well. So I'll just add a couple of notes. Once you've done your homework, you know who your constituency is, you need to make sure you're keeping them engaged through the life cycle of your campaign. It's always easier, of course, to keep folks engaged if there's a loud ticking clock. You know, this is our timeline, deadline at midnight. But when you have constant urgency, that can also create fatigue, and especially if your progress or your milestones are not forthcoming. So develop and manage the deadline so that your base can build a reasonable expectation. Give them a steady stream of wins, even if they're small, even if it's like, hey, we had this conversation and that was really good, you know, contextualize, and then help them digest the campaign in smaller bites. When you plan your engagement and your activations, think of them over the lifetime of a campaign, not just moment to moment. You know, you want to be working toward constant forward momentum. So some campaigns might just be over the course of a few months, but some can take years or decades. As an organizer, you'll need to continuously come up with ways for activists to engage and make sure those activities are actually helping you move toward your goal. Lastly, acknowledge the effort and impact of your volunteers and your community advocates. It's hard work to be engaged in this policy advocacy world. So keep folks informed, engaged, and that will keep them motivated. We'll go to the next slide. So my last section, communication. Talking about the work is part of doing the work. Invest in communications. If I can leave you with one thing, might be that. Purposeful communication. So if you've been thoughtful about your strategy, your goals, your tactics, and your power map, you should be on the right track for having really purposeful and clear communications. Know your audience. Don't just list institutions or governing bodies when you make your power maps. Think about the people inside of them. If you can identify real people within your target audiences, then you can better dig into what they care about and who they'll listen to. You can even use someone from your life as an example. You've all probably heard someone kind of assessing a campaign or assessing an ad or some language by saying, would my grandma understand this if they read it? Thinking of your grandma as a real person, you can start to think about, well, if I'm targeting people like my grandma, what does my grandma like? You know, what does she listen to? What would resonate with her? Make it personal and engaging. People like to belong. If you can tie your campaign or your messaging into a group they already belong to or want to belong to, or a body of work they are interested in, you've already made your job easier. Think about how you can leverage something they already care about to better connect them to your campaign. For example, a lot of people, if you use the word collective bargaining, that might not resonate with them. They might not be sure what it is or why they should care, but they might feel really strongly if you mentioned paying women a fair wage to them. So connect the dots for your audience and help. You really want to start from that place of mutual alignment. Next slide, please. Every word you choose in a campaign is taking up valuable real estate. So I love the idea of choosing words that create pictures. I chose this image that I took in Mexico City to illustrate this point because I found it really moving. It's on a protest wall downtown. Which is full of graffiti, and it really focuses on the countless disappeared women in Mexico and the government's failure to take action. The sign in English reads, "The women are always on the front line." And then for me, that invokes actually many images, and it really helps it to stick in my mind. Choose activities that give you the highest return on investment. So not all people are open to receiving information at all times. An important part of knowing your audience is knowing when they're most receptive and where they're most likely to go for information. For example, asking people to engage in a texting campaign by placing ads on morning radio stations might not make a lot of sense, since people, one, aren't likely to remember details if they're not able to write information down while they're doing their morning commute. And two, we don't want people texting and driving. So pair the type of information that you share to the platform and to the audience. And that helps us make sure we spend the time we spend and the money we spend communicating is as effective as possible. Lastly, but maybe most importantly, evaluate. And this is not just for evaluate your communications. That really applies to the whole campaign. It's a cycle. You should be in constant evaluation and constant editing mode. Now, that does not mean you should drive your team or your friends or your allies crazy by reinventing the campaign every week. That would be bad. But it does mean that you should be constantly looking for ways to adjust or tweak as you learn more about the campaign and your key stakeholders. So these are all some tips and tricks that we've used in our Give Snap a Raise advocacy and our other advocacy. I hope they are helpful. And I'm going to turn it back over to LaMonica. I think we have some time if there are any questions, and I'll open my screen up so I can see the chat.
Thank you, Rihanna. Hopefully this was a very informative presentation for all of the work that we're doing as advocates when it comes to addressing hunger, to ending hunger, and here in the district as well as in many of our other states across the nation. It's imperative that we look at more permanent solutions through policy implementation. But as we're working on those pieces of legislation that will address it on a permanent basis, how is it that we organize and advocate effectively in our own communities so that everyone understands the importance of what we are trying to pass and the need to address hunger and poverty and then the root causes of that as well. So if anyone has any questions, Rihanna and I are both available. Now, of course, I don't see any questions in the Q&A, nor do I see any questions in the chat. But our contact information is here if you want to take a deeper dive on how is it that we can help your states in passing more permanent solutions. There's quite a bit of policy in addition to Give Snap a Raise that DC has implemented to support and address hunger on various different fronts, including universal school meals. We have the Fresh Starts Act, which addresses DC jail food legislation for our returning citizens. Healthy Schools Act, Healthy Student Amendment, which addresses our school meals. So there's various pieces of legislation that DC has taken in order to address hunger for all of our communities. So we are happy to answer any questions, as well as you have our email, so you feel free to reach out. But we just want to thank you all for attending and joining us this afternoon, and we will hang around, I guess, for just a couple more minutes in case anyone does have a question.
Yeah, thanks, LaMonica. And I just wanted to add also my thanks and gratitude. Your time is valuable, so thank you for being here. And please be in touch with us or with other people that you may have met through this conference. We as advocates, I think sometimes feel like we have to invent everything. We have to invent the solution. Not me. I am a big steal everything. We don't need to do it. If DC has legislation that it works for you, take it and then fill in where you need to change it. Or someone's got a strategy that works, use that. Like, we only have limited time and energy. So like, don't feel like you have to break new ground all the time. If something's working, learn from others. I do see something in the chat. Any suggestions for those of us in very conservative states where legislators are not fans of SNAP? How do we begin changing perspectives? I might have a thought, but I want to start with you, LaMonica.
I think there's a couple ways that we can address this. One perspective is data. I'm a big fan of data and numbers tell a quantitative story just as well as storytelling tells the qualitative. And so sometimes in more conservative states, we have to, or for more conservative audiences, because Give Snap a Raise was met with some backlash. It was a very, very high price tag. $52 million is a very high price tag in a climate and in a district that was going through a very lean budget year, where budget cuts were very precise. And some of our human needs services programs and initiatives were experiencing cuts as well, even though there was a need. And so what we had to do and what worked well for us was telling the story. What does hunger look like? What are the numbers behind it? And so I shared the SNAP emergency allotment fact sheet a couple slides ago, but we use that in order to, as leverage to paint the picture of what does hunger look like. And then on top of that, we use the perspective from our community members. What are our SNAP participants really looking like? When we break this down, what does it look like? And a lot of it comes down to a family of four having to decide at the grocery store, what do I purchase? I don't have enough to feed my entire family. What's the dollar amount? It was $14 million that we lost per month, not over the course of a year or 2 years. It was $14 million a month that we lost in emergency allotments, and that brought people down from some participants from $281 all the way down to $30. And so we really had to make it plain and use the data to say that with almost 700,000 residents in the district and over 140,000 participants in SNAP, that's a large number of individuals that are experiencing food insecurity across the district. In addition to what percentage of those are older adults, and knowing that DC is the third highest in the nation for older adult hunger, and this is one of our most vulnerable communities, we really had to paint the picture and make it real and use data as leverage. That way we can come in with our perspective from our residents so that they can add on top of that and bring the human side of what this would look like and why we needed to do this. Brianna?
Yeah, and I'll just add on top of that because, DC might get a little purple, but we are pretty blue leaning. So a lot of my background is actually in agricultural policy. And so working with red states, working with rural states, and I will say rural and conservative and agricultural are not always the same, but they do tend to intersect. It might be about flipping the narrative lens. So unfortunately for all people or all policymakers, the lens of care might not work. And that's maybe sad, but it's true. So can we flip the lens from caring and saying this is just what's right? Can it be about economic independence, about helping people get to that point? Can it be about job creation and local economy? What else can it be about, even if that's not the lens that we're looking at? Not false, but like how can we flip the perspective to say, and that's what we're doing in our power map too, right? Like, what does this person care about? What are the levers that I could pull that would hit this person? And if it's economic development, okay, well, I'm going to make this argument. Maybe they really care about, like LaMonica mentioned, specifically about seniors, but not so much about other people. Then I can emphasize the senior population that's hurt. So consider your targets and like what they care about, and be willing to flex your narrative lens to meet that goal. I am seeing we're about.
The only other thing, I'm sorry, go ahead, Rihanna.
We're just about to run out of time, and I know we need to flip it over to Mayor to close. So let's see.
I just want to add this one last thing to it. In that flipping of the lens, SNAP also being a stimulus program. It's not just our residents, our SNAP participants that are impacted, but how does this impact our grocery stores? In DC, we have what are called healthy corner stores, all of our retailers. And so looking at how is this going to impact our total economy in our communities? And so again, switching that lens so that our legislators can understand that, yes, it is about care, but everyone in our entire ecosystem is going to be impacted, whether you are a recipient of the actual benefit or whether you are a retailer that is providing food for the recipient.
All right, Mayor, I think we can give it to you for close.
Thank you. Yes, thank you both for just giving us some really, really good information here today. Up next is our closing session and Hunger Free Communities Award presentation on the main stage. So in just a minute, you may see a window pop up for a prompt to enter that session, or you can go back to the lobby and find the session called Closing Session. And that concludes our time together. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.